You're out on your favorite lake on a really good point early morning. You're throwing a buzz bait and a giant bass comes up and busts on it but misses the bait. Now you felt the fish, so you know he felt you. What should you do? Well, if you don't have a follow-up bait, you're probably not going to catch that fish. Today on Fish Den 365, I'm going to give you my top 5 follow-up baits for catching bass. And we're going to go over which ones are best for which situations and also how to rig each one. Come on, let's go. Okay, so to start this off, I think we need to define what a follow-up bait is. So anytime you're throwing a primary lure, that could be a topwater lure, a spinner bait, a jerk bait, and you get a hit, but you don't hook the fish for whatever reason, oftentimes it's best to throw something else back at that fish. Now, why is that important? Well, you certainly don't want to miss the opportunity to try and catch that fish because you know he's active. He just tried to eat your lure. And you know approximately, relatively, where that fish is. If you can get right back in there again because you know relatively where he hit your lure. So this is an opportunity to catch a fish where you know one is. And so that's a big plus. So you don't want to just give up on that. And so that's why we have what we call follow-up baits. Usually they're soft plastic baits that you would follow up with in case you get that kind of bite. Now the first decision you have to make is when you do get a bite like that, should you throw the same bait back at the fish since it tried to eat that bait in the first place? And that's a good argument. That's something that you just kind of have to weigh for yourself based on your own experiences. I've had times where with a topwater frog, for example, I got blow up and I throw the same bait back in there and I caught the fish on the same topwater frog. Other times, I'd get a blow up, couldn't catch that fish, and then I'd throw something else in there, like a beaver, and I'd catch that fish. So it just depends. But the main thing is you got to do something quickly because the fish is hot at that moment. You've got him excited and he wants to eat, but that's not going to last long, and he's not going to stay in that same place for long either, potentially. So you have to act quickly when you do this. Generally, if I think the fish felt the lure and felt that something wasn't quite right, that's when I'll throw a follow-up bait right away. Other times, if I just got like a nip or a bump, I'll throw the same bait back at it. So in other words, if I'm throwing a spinner bait and I get a little bump, I might throw that spinner bait right back there again. But if I don't get bit, I'm certainly going to still throw the follow-up bait, right? I got to have the follow-up bait ready. So that's another thing is you need to have that rod ready to go with that bait on it. Whatever that bait is. And we're going to go through my top 5 in a few seconds here. But you need to have that on the deck ready to go or in your, if you're fishing from shore nearby so that you can quickly put your primary rod down and pick up that follow-up bait and get it out there. Now, real quick before we go into these 5, bad things and weird things happen when it comes to this kind of thing. And I'm sure most people have experienced this. I know I have. So let's say that buzzbait scenario, right? One blows up on it, he feels it, and now I want to throw a follow-up bait. I get my rod and, I'm in a hurry, right? I got to get that thing out there as fast as I can. And then I'm trying to get that cast, and then I look up at the rod, and I see my lines tangled around the tip of the rod. And then I know I got to fumble with that. And meanwhile, all this time is going by. Then finally, I throw that bait out there, and I completely miss the mark. It's not even anywhere near where that fish just blew up. So I got to reel it back in. You want to avoid all those things as best you can. So how do you do that? Well, you make sure that your rods and reels are organized on the deck, or on the bank, wherever you are. Make sure they're organized and ready to go in a position where you can just release the lure and cast it out there. When that happens, when you get a big fish blow up and you realize you want to start with the follow-up bait, take a deep breath as you're grabbing that follow-up bait. Just breathe. Don't get too excited. Breathe, grab that bait, and get it out there, and you're much more likely to have it go smoothly and have that bait land where it needs to land and hopefully catch that fish. So without further ado, here are my top 5, and I'm going to give them to you kind of in priority order, although I've used all 5 of these, and the priority depends on the conditions. So listen up for the conditions because that's what makes choosing these most important. Okay, so the number 1 follow-up bait for me would be a soft plastic stick bait like a Senko. This is just a great follow-up bait, one of the best you can throw. And if you're fishing in open water, I'm going to throw it wacky rigged. I'm going to wacky rig it. Oftentimes when it comes to wacky rigs, I'll switch from a Senko to a big TRD. This is a Zman big TRD. It floats, but I like to use like a 1/32 or a 1/16 ounce jig like this. This is a wacky jig head. You just put it through the bait and then you throw it out there. And if it's open water, that thing is undulating, and it just looks more alive. You're more likely to get the bites that way. So that's what I like to do if it's open water. If I'm fishing where there's cover, then I will Texas rig the Senko. I'll use a 3/0 or 4/0 extra wide gap hook, and I will not put a weight on it. I'll just throw it out there and let it sink slowly, and Texas rig it if I'm fishing cover. So number 1 is the Senko. Number 2 is a tube. This is a very underrated bait as a follow-up bait, and one of the best things you can throw. If you're in open water, you can choose a couple of different tube heads. Don't know if you can hear this one. That one has a little rattle in it. You just poke the tube head up into the tube, and now you have a bait that when you throw this out, it spirals on the fall. So in open water, you're getting that spiral effect, a very different action than the Senko. So in times, if I don't get bit on the Senko, I'll throw a second follow-up bait. I'll throw that tube if I have it ready to go, because oftentimes that spiral action looks like a dying or dying bait fish, and the fish will come and react to that if they don't react to the Senko. So great thing there. And if I'm in cover, then a Texas rig tube with a bullet weight on the front of it is another great way. Again, you want a 3/0 extra wide gap hook, maybe 1/4 ounce, maybe even depending on what you're fishing, how you're fishing, maybe 3/8 or a 1/2 ounce. Great for throwing the tube in cover if you get that strike in cover. The third bait I like as a follow-up is a simple Fluke, a soft plastic jerk bait, especially if I'm throwing in open water and it's a bait fish type of bite. Top water lure, for example. This is a great bait to be able to throw out there as a follow-up, because you can throw it out and still make it work along the surface, or let it dive or fish it slowly like it's dying. Just a great way to go about fishing, and you can do a lot of things with this bait. You can Texas rig it with an extra wide gap hook, and without any weight, throw it that way. You could use a belly weighted hook so that you get some sink to it in case the fish are down a little deeper. Maybe you got the bite on a deeper spinnerbait. Or you could even put a hover rig hook into this, and now you've got this hover rig action on the Fluke. All those are great ways to use a Fluke as a follow-up bait. Okay, so that's number 3. Number 4 is this bait right here. This is the Reaction Innovations Beaver. A great follow-up bait when I'm fishing in cover, especially. I particularly prefer this one if I get a blow-up. If I'm throwing a frog or a toad in pads and I get that blow-up, I like to go right back in there with the Beaver. So many times I've caught fish on the Beaver after the blow-up. It's just I've converted probably more fish with the Beaver in pads than any other follow-up bait. And then the last one is the Larew Biffle Bug, but I cut the legs off so that it looks like this. I Texas rig this, bullet weight on the front, and I like to use this if I have that, again, in cover, and if I have that bite in milfoil. This is a great bait to follow up a strike when you're fishing milfoil, thick, dense weeds. It goes through those weeds very nicely. It has that fall that looks like it's an injured bait fish. It falls on weird angles, and so it just it glides. It just glides in different ways, and it's another great way, a great follow-up bait for fishing milfoil and thick weeds. Well, those are my top 5. An honorable mention would be just a basic plastic worm. Plastic worms work good as follow-up baits as well. So that's another one, an honorable mention that I'll throw in there for you. Would love to hear what your follow-up baits are and what your experiences are with follow-up baits. Does it make sense to throw them right away? Do you throw the same bait back if you got a blow-up? How do you handle this kind of thing? What's your success with it? And what are your favorite follow-up baits? Please comment below and let me know. Would love to get a conversation started on that. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. So keep it tuned here for the next video. Until next time, be safe out there. Hope to see you on the water. And as always, may God bless your fishing endeavors.